We've brought together 50 bankruptcy lawyers, one from every state.
Can I start a new business in a Chapter 13?
On today's show, bankruptcy lawyer Matthew Frey from Michigan answers not only whether you can start a new business in a Chapter 13, but he takes a deep dive into the pros and cons of doing so. Make sure to stay to the end so you don't miss crucial information.
Well, first of all, it's a great question, one that comes up very frequently in a Chapter 13 case. And I think we need to talk about that in a little bit of depth in a couple of different contexts. Number one context, I like to remind everyone, if you're in a Chapter 13 case or considering Chapter 13, you are asking the government to help you out with your debts. For whatever reason, whether it's catching up a mortgage, restructuring a car loan, you're asking the government for help, okay? Naturally, the government responds with, okay, but we've got some rules for you. Especially when it comes to starting a business, those rules are going to really apply in a number of contexts. The first context, is the business going to cost you money? Okay. And this is going to dive into, what kind of a business are you thinking of? So let me give you some examples. Real easy business. If you say, hey, I want to be a self-employed Uber driver. Okay. You already got a car. You got to pay for some gas. App's going to do the work. You might make some more money. That's probably not a problem. Okay. You might get some write-offs, things like that. But unless you're writing off more than you're making, which may be an IRS problem for those who try to deduct full amount of their expenses, probably not a problem. And then you have the alternate extreme, which is I want to go borrow a bunch of money to fulfill my lifelong dream of X, open a restaurant, start a retail business, something that's going to require a lot of capital outlays, potentially, or borrowing funds. All right. So we go back to the rules that we have in our Chapter 13. The big one is you have to commit your disposable income. This is your income after payroll deductions, monthly expenses, things that are ordinary, reasonable, necessary for your plan to succeed. Okay. Food, transportation costs, insurance, utilities, all those things, rent, mortgage payment if they're not inside your plan, car payments, etc. At the end of that budget, you get a number. That number should be your plan payment, all right? If you're starting a business, the question is, how is it going to affect that small number or large number as the case may be? So when someone says, I want to start a business, the immediate question is, how is it going to affect your disposable income? In the Uber driver case, maybe you have more income. Maybe now that you're bored in the afternoons or the evenings, or the mornings, depending on your shift, you make some extra money, you have a greater amount of disposable income. Unfortunately, that's going to trigger potentially a plan modification. Many people start with an assumption of, if I go make some more money, and a lot of times it's a self-employment type gig, starting a business, the trustee is going to say, you make more, you can pay more. And a lot of debtors respond with, that's horrible. Why would I do that? And I tell people, when you're in bankruptcy, you need to think of it in the context also of, if you were not in bankruptcy and you took on this side gig, the start of this business, and the goal, of course, is to get out of debt, you're going to contribute that money towards the debt anyway. So it's really the trustee doing the same thing that you arguably should be doing. Now, if you conversely look at that, and let's say you're starting a business and you find out the business is costing you a lot of money, all right? And you propose a plan modification to reduce your payment because you're deciding to, from the trustee's perspective, throw money away. And that's basically what it is. They're going to deny that all day long. Many trustees may have a plan provision, if they believe you're going to do that you will not put money into a money-losing venture where your write-offs, deductions are more than what comes in, because that affects what goes to your creditors, and they have a job to protect those people and to make sure that you're following the rules. There's some other additional rules that are always worth talking about. Chapter 13, of course, very regulated by the code. One of the rules is normally in every jurisdiction that I've ever seen, you can't borrow money above certain amounts without trustee and or court permission. So if we're talking about a large business, something you want to do that's going to cost you some startup capital, you want to take out a loan for let's say $5,000, $10,000, maybe more, even an SBA loan or something like that, you're going to need the trustee's permission. Otherwise, you're going to run the risk of committing fraud, having your case dismissed, etc. And normally speaking, you're not going to get it. Okay. Chapter 13 is really not the time from the trustee's perspective to be experimenting with your income. The idea is something happened, got you into filing the Chapter 13 because your debts were giving you problems. They want to get you to the finish line, but experiments along the way typically are not going to help with that. The easiest example, I can probably give is from a medical type setting. And I don't, necessarily want to go too morbid here, but let's say you have a medical condition, whatever the medical condition is, and there's a bunch of remedies that have been around for 20-some, 30 years, and they're going to work, okay? Maybe they have some side effects that don't sound so appealing, and then you go on Facebook and you say, okay, well, I can follow the Facebook advice, and Facebook says I'm going to succeed. It's kind of the same thing with your business and getting out of the debt. We know if you work that 9 to 5, you keep your wages, your income stays steady, you're going to get across the finish line. Maybe it takes a little bit longer. Maybe there's a couple bumps in the road. But if you're following, the Facebook advice, we don't know what's going to happen. The obvious argument a debtor is going to make is, I'm going to make more money. I can pay more towards the debt. The argument the trustee and the court are going to say is, we have no idea of knowing that. You could get into this business, regardless of what it costs, and it could flop on its head, and now you have more debt. You have to dismiss your case, potentially file a new case to add in this additional debt, so on and so forth. So it's really a risky venture, and I tell clients it's just not normally a good idea. And I'll give you an example from my own practice. I have a couple of clients, Mr. and Mrs. X, we'll call them, and we filed a bankruptcy for them because they'd fallen behind on some land contract and vehicle payments. They lost their jobs, and their case got dismissed, and then they came back a number of months later and said, hey, we've got some new jobs. We're both making great money. We filed a new Chapter 13 case. Filed a motion to extend the stay, told the court these individuals are doing great. They've got an increase in income. We're going to pay back more towards creditors. Will be done faster. All kinds of wonderful things. Court grants the stay motion. And then about 2 months into the case, both debtors lose their jobs. We're talking $110,000 worth of income yearly just erased within a week. And the debtor's solution was, this is a great time for us to start a freight business. We're going to get some money from a relative, so they don't have to borrow the money. And we're going to start with this cargo van, and we're going to drive freight loads, I believe from like Menards, Home Depot, Lowe's, something like that. And we're going to drive these to the locations, and we're going to make all kinds of money. And these individuals, very far behind on their home for the land contract, very far behind their car payments. They have 2 children in the home. And I asked them, of course, why not just go back to the job? Why not apply somewhere else? They're very employable people, but they really just wanted to start this business. And every other week, there was a new excuse why they couldn't make their plan payment. The van broke down, the loads weren't there. There's a delay from the vendor, if you will, and delay of the payments. Every time I turn around, there's an excuse. And I told Mr. and Mrs. X, I said, you are risking the roof over your head, your children's heads, being able to go from point A to point B, chasing what's really not going anywhere. And so eventually, we were able to keep the case alive long enough to where Mr. X went back and got a job. Now has a payroll deduction, plan payments are coming back in, things are back on track. Now, in fairness to them, they had a business plan. They had sources of where they thought, revenue was going to come from. This was not something I would say was done on the fly, where it's a hope and a dream, but it illustrates that even the best laid plans, when you're in the Chapter 13, can just go wrong, and then you really put everything at risk. And the problem with bankruptcy and the risk is remember, when you filed, you disclosed all of your assets, all of your debts, all of your income sources, all of your transactional history. Any creditor who really wants to collect now has everything they'll ever need. So in the past, maybe they had a little bit of your information. Now they've got it all. And if your case doesn't succeed, you maybe got some bigger issues here. So can you start the business? Yes, it needs to be approached with a lot of questions, a lot of caution. Okay. Remember, the rule is you can't borrow certain amounts of money. It'll be in your Chapter 13 plan. There should be in the standard plan provisions. Normally, you'll find a clause that says how much you can borrow without court or trustee permission. And again, you've got that issue. The other issue, of course, is what happens if my business is successful. Remember, again, as we talked before, any increase in your disposable income now, you've got to update your schedules. You got to pay that into your plan. You're not going to see, in most cases, any benefit, dollar-wise, if you will, from going out and making a whole bunch more money. Okay? Now, arguably, if you're in a 100% plan, you make more money, trustee doesn't have to raise the payment, that sort of thing, because you're paying back all your creditors anyway. But for most people, that's simply not going to be true. So you need to really think, what is the goal of starting this business? Am I going to run afoul of the rules to get it going? Is it going to be a drain on my bankruptcy estate, causing me issues, causing me to incur more debt when maybe now's not the best time to do that? And then you also have the issue in many jurisdictions, a lot of things that happen post-petition don't vest in the debtor. They may vest in your bankruptcy estate. So if you start a business, get some shares of ownership, that may not belong to you. It may belong to your bankruptcy estate in the similar fashion that if someone dies in the 180 days from the date of your Chapter 7 filing, for example, that becomes part of your bankruptcy estate. So you really need to talk to your attorney, understand the landscape, and then probably really spend a lot of time thinking, is this the route I want to go? Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here. Maybe there's a timing issue that says, okay, it's a once-in-a-lifetime deal. It's only going to happen on this particular day, this particular year, and I have to go for it. But, again, under the context of the Chapter 13 plan, maybe you need to consider dismissing your case. Okay, maybe you're going to have to go that route. I have a lot of calls come in from people, and I tell them, I said, I'm not the dream killer over on this side of the phone. I'm not here to tell you to close your business, go work a, X number of hour job, 40 hours a week. If your lifelong dream is to do a certain thing, go for it. But it just may not be compatible with the bankruptcy code. Okay. I had a intake earlier this year. Gentleman was trying to flip houses, basically be the internet landlord that you see, Grant Cardone and those kinds of folks, if you will. Robert Kiyosaki, investing in the real estate, getting the rental income, flipping the houses, those kinds of programs. And he has some properties, putting a lot of money in, borrowing money, called to say, hey, can I get out of all this money I borrowed? And he wanted to keep putting more money into properties that were just never going to be worth it. Even in the non-bankruptcy context, it was a bad idea. I said, anybody in the world would tell you, you are spending $5 to make $2.50 in a best case scenario. It's just not good. I said, but if that's your dream, if you want to be that landlord where you live and do whatever, I said, I'm not here to tell you that you can't do it. I'm just going to tell you, you're not going to be able to do it and file bankruptcy and keep that going. So, again, starting the business during the case, after you filed, to kind of wrap this up here a little bit, check with your Chapter 13 plan, talk to your attorney. They should be able to walk you through what are the risks, what are the benefits here. And a lot of times there just isn't one. Ideally, maybe you work on the business, work on the idea in general, get your business plan order. That way, when you get your discharge, you can hit the ground running. much better way to do it. Sure, maybe you miss out on a couple years worth of something, growth or whatever, marketing, but, be very careful. Remember, you've asked for help. You've asked the government to step in between you and your creditors to say, hey, I can't do this on my own. I want some help. The government's going to respond with, again, we're requiring you to be, somewhat responsible with your money. Chapter 13 is not a cakewalk. It's not supposed to be painful, but the word uncomfortable is usually used in a lot of contexts where it's going to require some changes in life. And if your goal is, I don't want to work my job, I want to just do my own deal, then maybe, again, as I tell people, Chapter 13 may not be right for you, but remember, it is voluntary. In almost every single case, you can dismiss your Chapter 13 case with very little effort on behalf of you or your attorney. Court signs the order, you're out of the case, out of the bankruptcy protections, and if you can make your dream a reality, great. And then use that money to pay back the debt. What I hate to see people do, though, is do something where they end up right back in the bankruptcy and all they've gotten from it is maybe a financially painful lesson. So again, check with your attorney. Remember, you got to have full transparency with the trustee. They're going to go through your records. They're going to check your tax returns every year to see what you got going on. And, again, if you've done something where you shouldn't have, you may cause yourself some real big problems that you weren't anticipating.
Click on the video on the left for Does It Matter How You Structure a Business in Chapter 13. On the right, this is what YouTube recommends you watch next. And don't forget, we have resources for you in the description.